personally, it can feel quite hard sometimes to make those kind of harder decisions. And it's particularly important, I guess, that you do that with integrity in an industry or in a regulatory role where you have built relationships, and collaboration is one of your key or one of your important tools for achieving the outcomes you want. To be able to step back into that kind of hard-edged regulatory thing does mess with your head a bit. I would always try and rationalise it based on this is the job. Another way of thinking about it, I guess, is that in any role you're in as a senior leader, you are kind of a steward of the organisation and the process and the intent of what's trying to be achieved. So you've got to do it with a degree of objectivity around that, as opposed to the personal kind of view. I don't know how to describe how you can actually manage it though, As a leader, sort of personally trying to walk your way through this balance between being the hard-edged regulator when you need to and the collaborative regulator focused on joint outcomes on the other hand, I think it is down to understanding your role as a regulator, that it is a professional activity. It's based on established frameworks that you should follow. You can go to whatever you want to, whether it's Solicitor General's guidelines or the judge over your shoulder or whatever, to inform the way you should think and weigh up decisions around the action you're going to take. You should rely on them on a professional basis, drawing on, as far as possible, objective evidence and information. It's not a personal preference or a personal perspective as to what the outcomes should be or whatever. And I think that you should talk about that with the regulatory community, that that's how you're operating. You should demonstrate it in your actions, and you should also demonstrate that where a better outcome can be achieved by working together, then you're willing to go down that path as well. I think these things are successful over time if you walk the talk around them. In thinking about how you change course or change direction when you're working on something, and you maybe be committed to the way you're approaching it, and then it turns out that's not the right way to do it. It can be challenging because you get so invested in the effort you've put in sometimes. I can give you a brief example where in my earlier days in a regulatory area that focused on economic regulation, there was a significant party who looked to be causing economic detriment. And probably because of where I'd come from and the work that I'd done, I thought the right approach was to take an enforcement approach. So I spent a lot of time building a really strong case, I thought, with a senior decision maker about the use of powers to address some stuff. And as soon as I started discussing it with the person, it was like, no, we're not doing that. It's the wrong thing to do. It's not the right approach here. And what I realised now in retrospect was I was doing that, what we often talk to now as a sort of a tools-based approach, not an outcomes-based approach. And I often reflect on that and think about what we're trying to achieve and what the best way to do it is, what is the right tool to do it with, not the one that you're most comfortable with or seems easiest in a way. Generally though, as in terms of changing direction, it takes a bit of practice to accept that if you listen and you're slowly realising that you're going down the wrong path, that it's like stop and change course. I think the way I do that is I reflect and I acknowledge that it's the wrong approach, and I openly make the shift. I think it's a really important thing to be able to do, but it can be quite challenging. And I think people respect it actually, if you're open about that I was, because often you're basing things on the information that's available or whatever, and something changes. It's always helpful if you've got something specific you can point to that with this piece of information, the game has changed. If you need to do that, then you've usually got something like that. I think an element of this is also taking the risk of putting yourself somewhere that might be initially uncomfortable, and feel a little bit of confidence in the fact that you've got the core skills that you need. And personally, I've never felt comfortable in the subject matter that I've been regulating, because having shifted through different industries or different domains semi-regularly, 5 or 6 years, probably my longest role was 9 years, and that was at Maritime. But particularly in industry regulation, you're dealing with people for whom 20 years is a short time, So never really felt comfortable. So you always have to fall back on the kind of core knowledge and skills and practices and the relationship management, the process, the kind of curiosity and willingness to listen kind of thing to make your way through all of this.